What the hell are you doing here? Before you even think about judging the story you're about to hear, I want you to do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and get ready. Because what started as a mother's proudest day ended in a public humiliation so vile, so disgusting, that it forced her billionaire son to make a choice that would either destroy his empire or change the world. You're not going to want to miss a single second of this. Her name was Elellanar Vance, and she walked into the Aspen Highlands Country Club with the kind of quiet pride that money can't buy. Minutes later, she would be shattered in front of a room full of billionaires. But what her son, the CEO, did next, nobody, and I mean nobody, saw it coming. The valet, a kid no older than 20, barely had time to yank open her door before Elellanar Vance stepped out of the gleaming black Escalade, clutching a simple leather purse with both hands, as if it were a holy book. She didn't wear Gucci or Prada. She didn't need to. Everything about her screamed quality. The clean lines of her navy blue dress, the perfectly pressed seams, and a profound dignity that radiated with every step she took. Her hat was a crisp white, wide-brimmed with a single silk ribbon that matched her low-heeled shoes. It was a church hat, the kind her late husband, bless his soul, always said made her look like an angel who'd decided to visit Earth for a while. The Aspen Highlands Country Club, a monument to old money and quiet power, sat silent and imposing under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Her son, Elijah, had told her this lunch would be low-key. "Just come, Ma. No big speeches, no fuss. Just a quiet toast after we sign the papers." She was so proud of him, so proud of what he'd built from nothing. Vance Logistics, an empire that had grown from a single drafty warehouse in Gary, Indiana, into a nationwide supply chain infrastructure that was the circulatory system of American commerce. And today, this very afternoon, it was about to merge with the Sterling Corporation. Old money, deep, gnarled roots that stretched back to the railroad tycoons. But Elellanar didn't care about their pedigree or their billions. She came to support her son. She came because he asked her to be there. She had barely made it up the sprawling marble steps, her sensible shoes clicking softly, before a woman in a severe, tailored uniform stepped directly in front of her, physically blocking her path. The woman's face was a mask of cold professionalism. "Excuse me," she said, the words clipped, devoid of warmth. "Deliveries and staff are to use the back entrance." Elellanar tilted her head, a flicker of confusion in her warm eyes. "I'm sorry. There must be a misunderstanding. I'm here for a lunch with my son, Elijah Vance." The uniformed woman didn't so much as blink. "Yes, well, if you're with the catering team or other event staff, it's club policy. The rear access is around the building to the left." Elellanar blinked slowly, the Colorado sun feeling suddenly harsh on her face. It wasn't the first time someone had made an assumption based on the color of her skin or the simplicity of her attire, but the sting never lessened. It was a familiar, bitter poison. "I am not staff," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the hurt churning in her stomach. "I am a guest." Across the vast manicured patio, Elijah Vance had just raised a champagne flute, a genuine smile lighting up his face. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, scanned the lawn, searching for her. He found her, and he saw the uniformed woman's rigid, confrontational posture. He saw the slight tilt of his mother's head, something in his chest, something primal and protective, tightened into a cold, hard knot. Elellanar took a shallow breath, fighting to maintain the composure that had been her armor for 70 years. "You can check the guest list. My name is Elellanar Vance. My son is one of the principals meeting here today." Before the staffer could formulate a response, a new voice sliced through the crisp mountain air, sharp and brittle like glass dragging across tile. Well, I suppose they'll let anyone in these days. It was Beatrice Sterling, the matriarch of the Sterling Empire. Her pearls, heavy and ostentatious, rested against the silk of her blouse. She looked Eleanor up and down with an expression of mild disgust, as if she were examining a stain on the carpet. "Darling," she said to no one in particular, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "are we letting the cleaning staff dine with us now?" Several heads turned. A man in a Brioni suit chuckled under his breath. The sound was like a physical blow. Elijah's jaw clenched so hard a muscle jumped along his cheekbone. He was mid-toast, the champagne flute still held aloft, but his smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. He set the glass down on the table, the clink of crystal on wood unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense atmosphere. His colleagues, the architects of this billion-dollar deal, noticed the storm clouds gathering in his expression. One of the Sterling sons, Bradley, the youngest and most insecure, gave a nervous laugh. "She's probably just joking, Eli," he stammered. But Elijah didn't hear him. He was already moving. Eleanor looked up, her face a serene, unreadable mask, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her handbag. Beatrice Sterling was already turning away, dismissing the entire interaction from her mind. Just another Tuesday for a woman who had never been told no. Elijah walked straight to his mother, bypassing the cluster of billionaires as if they were statues. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch a stark contrast to the rage simmering just beneath his skin. He looked her directly in the eye. "You okay, Ma?" She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, even though she wasn't. "I don't want to make a fuss, baby. This is your day." "I know you don't," he said, his voice dangerously low, "but I will." He turned his gaze to the staffer, who now looked deeply uncomfortable, her face flushing a blotchy red. "This is my mother. You just disrespected the single most important person in this building." The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked mortified. Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet intensity was more terrifying than any shout. He turned his back on the gawking crowd, gently guided Eleanor back to the SUV, opened the door for her himself, and helped her in. She reached for his arm before he could close the door, her eyes pleading. "Elijah, don't ruin your moment over me." He gave her a look that was filled with a love so fierce, it was almost painful. "Ma," he said softly, "you are the moment." Then he shut the door and walked back up those marble steps, his movements calm, measured, masking the deep, volcanic fire brewing beneath the surface. But what he did next, just hours later, wouldn't just shake up boardrooms and family dynasties. It would send a shockwave across the entire country, igniting a firestorm in headlines and on news channels from coast to coast. Back inside the opulent dining hall, Elijah's seat sat empty. The custom Mont Blanc pen, meant for signing the final merger agreement, rested beside a thick stack of papers that represented over a year of brutal negotiations, late-night strategy sessions, and corporate maneuvering. It was a billion-dollar deal, a legacy-defining moment. A champagne tower, a monument to the expected celebration, gleamed near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Everything was in place, except Elijah. The mood shifted the second he returned. It wasn't dramatic. There was no yelling, no angry declarations. It was the heavy, pregnant quiet that follows a lightning strike. A silence so thick you could feel the ozone in the air. "Everything all right?" asked Preston Ward, the Sterling Corporation's general counsel. His voice was laced with a forced calm, the way a man speaks when he smells $1 million problem but can't yet see the smoke. Elijah didn't answer right away. His gaze swept across the room, taking in the board members, the Sterling family, the high-priced lawyers. Then his eyes landed on Beatrice Sterling. She was still sipping her wine, half-turned in her chair, legs elegantly crossed, acting as if she hadn't even noticed the disruption. She wasn't just comfortable. She looked certain. Certain that the deal was done, that her money and her name had already smoothed over any unpleasantness. He walked over to his chair, placed both hands on the back of it, but didn't sit. "I want to say something," he said. A few people looked up. The room didn't quiet. It froze. "You all know how much this deal meant," he began, his voice even, controlled. "Not just for our companies, but for the markets, for the next generation of technological infrastructure in this country. This merger was supposed to change everything." He paused, looking at every single face, one by one, letting the weight of his words settle. "But I'm not signing it." For 2 seconds, there was absolute stillness. Then, the dam broke. Low murmurs erupted, rippling through the room like a contagion. Confusion. Disbelief. Someone whispered, "Wait, what?" Beatrice Sterling's head turned, not quickly, but with a sharp, deliberate motion, the way a predator turns toward a sound it doesn't understand. "Excuse me?" she said, the words laced with a condescending amusement, almost a laugh. Elijah nodded slowly. "Excuse you indeed." "Is this some kind of negotiation tactic?" Preston, the lawyer, interjected, trying to regain control. "Elijah, if there's a last-minute concern, we can certainly go back to the table." Elijah finally sat down, not in the chair reserved for the signing, but in one at the far end of the table, furthest from the paperwork. "No," he said calmly. "There is no more table." Beatrice scoffed, leaning forward with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Let's not overreact to a simple misunderstanding, shall we? I didn't recognize the woman, that's all." He blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. "That woman is my mother." "I'm aware of that now," she replied, her voice still cool, but a flicker of irritation showing through. "But surely—" "No," Elijah cut her off, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried across the room with more force than a shout. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You said what you meant." Preston cleared his throat, his face turning red. "Elijah, we've invested millions into the due diligence and prep work. Both sides. There are significant legal implications here for breach of contract." Elijah leaned back, looking completely unbothered. "Then I'll see you in court. You can explain to a judge why disrespecting my family was a core part of your merger strategy." "Don't be so emotional," Beatrice muttered, the words dripping with disdain. That did it. He leaned forward again, folding his hands on the polished mahogany. "Emotional? You think I built my company from a corner office with a view? I loaded trucks, Beatrice. I drove delivery routes at 3 a.m. when my drivers called in sick. I ran payroll from a folding card table in my apartment because we couldn't afford an accountant. I watched my mother, that woman, take 2 buses to clean houses so I could keep the lights on in our first office." His voice grew harder with every word. "So when she shows up here, wearing her finest, proud as hell of her son, and you humiliate her in front of everyone? You didn't just humiliate her. You humiliated me." No one said a word. The silence was absolute. Elijah stood one last time. "There are deals you lose sleep over not signing. This isn't one of them." He walked out. No briefcase, no papers, no handshake. He just left, leaving a billion-dollar deal and a room full of shocked faces in his wake. But by the next morning, silence was no longer an option for anyone involved. The media had the story, and they were starving. Okay, let's pause. A billion-dollar deal. He walked away from generational wealth, the kind of money that changes your family tree forever. What do you guys think? Was it an act of profound principle, or was it the biggest financial mistake in history? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. I really want to know what you would have done. The first outlet to run the story was a niche business podcast out of Denver. A guest who'd been at the luncheon leaked just enough to light the fuse. The headline was explosive. Black CEO walks out of billion-dollar Aspen merger after mother insulted by Sterling family matriarch. That headline alone contained enough fuel to start a wildfire. By noon, TechCrunch, Forbes, and the Wall Street Journal had picked it up. By 5 o'clock, cable news anchors were already debating it, their faces grim and serious. The story was everywhere, not because a corporate deal fell through, that happens every day, but because of why it did. A pack of reporters caught Elijah Vance walking into his downtown Chicago office the next morning. No sunglasses, no entourage, just him in a sharp suit, holding a coffee and nodding to the front desk security guard like he always did. One reporter shouted, "Mr. Vance, was Beatrice Sterling's comment the sole reason you canceled the merger?" Another yelled, "Do you regret walking away from $1 billion?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Inside the glass and steel headquarters of Vance Logistics, his team was already weathering a hurricane. The phones were ringing off the hook. Some investors were confused. Others were absolutely furious. But a surprising number, a growing chorus, were proud. Emails and messages flooded their inboxes from people they'd never met. Executives from rival firms, warehouse workers from their own distribution centers, school teachers, retired veterans, all saying variations of the same thing. Thank you. Thank you for not letting that slide. That afternoon, Elijah scheduled a press conference. There were no fancy press kits, no professionally staged backdrop. He used a single podium, a folding table, and crammed 25 reporters into a conference room built for 12. He stepped up to the mic. He looked tired, but his eyes were steady, resolute. "I didn't cancel this deal because of a misunderstanding," he began, his voice calm and clear. "I canceled it because the second you allow disrespect to have a seat at the table, it poisons everything in the room. I wasn't raised that way, and I refuse to build a future on a foundation of silence." A woman from CNBC asked the inevitable question. "Can you confirm that it was Beatrice Sterling who made the comment directly?" Elijah didn't flinch. "Yes. Loud enough for people nearby to hear. And more importantly, loud enough for my mother to feel it." "Some might say that's not a valid business reason to walk away from a company-defining deal," another reporter chimed in. He nodded slowly, acknowledging the point. "That depends," he said, "on what kind of company you're trying to define." The room fell quiet again. He didn't speak for long. He didn't need to. He ended with a line that would be quoted for years to come. "Respect isn't a negotiable term in a contract, and if we start trading our dignity for a purchase price, then we've already lost." He stepped down and walked out, just as he had the day before. But outside that conference room, the world had changed. In the quiet corners of corporate America, where people usually whispered about microaggressions and slights, they were suddenly speaking up and speaking loud. That same night, clips of his speech went viral on TikTok, X, and YouTube. A former event planner for the Sterling family posted a long thread detailing how she was once told to use the service elevator during a high-profile charity gala she had organized. A Latino caterer shared a story of how he'd been asked to remove his company apron before entering the front lobby of a Sterling-owned building to discuss a setup. The thread got thousands of shares in just a few hours. Elijah hadn't planned any of it. He wasn't trying to start a movement. But sometimes, all it takes is one person standing their ground for others to find their footing. Meanwhile, behind the stone walls of the Sterling estate, the family was scrambling. In an emergency board meeting, Beatrice's oldest son, Harrison Sterling, who'd been mostly absent during the final negotiations, asked the one question none of them wanted to face. "Do we have to issue an apology?" Beatrice frowned, a look of utter disbelief on her face. "I don't apologize to people who overreact." "You insulted the man's mother, Mom," someone snapped from across the table. "In public. during the signing of the biggest deal in our company's history. What in God's name did you think was going to happen? We've made comments worse than that to each other in this very room, she argued, completely missing the point. And none of us torched a billion-dollar acquisition over it, Harrison muttered, his face pale. The numbers were already shifting. Stockholders were calling, demanding answers. Brand analysts were warning about catastrophic reputation costs. Even their high-powered PR firm was hesitant when asked to spin the narrative. That weekend, the sterling name, once a symbol of class and old money elegance, took a devastating hit. People were remembering every story they'd ever heard, every buried encounter that didn't feel quite right. What had once been perceived as sophistication was now being seen through a new lens: entitlement, arrogance, and thinly veiled bigotry. But while the Sterlings scrambled to contain the inferno, Elijah was about to face a new kind of pressure, this time from inside his own circle. Inside the Chicago headquarters, the atmosphere wasn't exactly celebratory. Elijah's decision had made him a folk hero in the public eye, but symbols attract weight, pressure, and intense scrutiny. Some of it came quietly, behind closed doors. Some of it did not. He met with his executive team in the upstairs conference room, a wide glass space overlooking the Chicago River. Most of them had been with him from the beginning, some since the early days in that single Gary warehouse. But loyalty has layers, and not everyone was on the same page. Elliot Trammell, his CFO, and a man who saw the world in spreadsheets, was the first to speak. We need to talk about the long-term fallout, not just this week, 6 months from now. We had international infrastructure expansion tied directly to this merger, Eli. That's gone. I know, Elijah replied, his voice calm. We're also looking at a massive legal backlash, Elliot continued, pushing a folder across the table. Sterling's lawyers are already drafting breach of contract claims. Their angle is that you killed the deal for purely personal reasons, violating your fiduciary duty to the shareholders. It wasn't personal, Elijah said, his eyes hard. It was a matter of principle. But can we afford that principle right now? Asked Julian Ricks, his COO, a brilliant but pragmatic operator. We're still a privately held company. You think our board isn't going to panic when they see the legal bills? Elijah looked at Julian, his gaze steady. Let them. That shut the room up for a moment. Then Nia Whitlow, his firebrand head of marketing, leaned forward. Eli, I support what you did. I swear to God I do. But you have to understand what you've become. You're not just a CEO anymore. You're a headline, a symbol. People are calling you the man who walked away from $1 billion to protect his mother. That comes with a different kind of heat. She's right, Elliot added. Some of our more conservative investors are getting nervous. I've had 2 calls this morning from venture capital partners. They want assurances. They want a new 5-year plan yesterday. Elijah stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. Traffic flowed across the bridges. A woman walked her child across the street, holding his hand tightly. He thought of Elellanar, of how small and vulnerable she had looked on those marble steps in Aspen, and how tall and strong she had stood anyway. I am not going to teach people that power means you have to swallow poison with a smile, Elijah said finally, turning back to his team. Not here, not in my company, and not for a check, no matter how many zeros are on it. Julian leaned back, frustrated. Okay. But what if we collapse because of this? What then? Then we rebuild, Elijah said without hesitation. But at least we won't have rotted from the inside out. There was silence after that, silence after. And then, something unexpected happened. Nia nodded, a slow, determined gesture. Then Elliot gave a reluctant sigh and nodded too. Finally, Julian shrugged, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. We'll hold them off, Elliot said. For now. They didn't all agree, not completely. But something had shifted in that room. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a little of both. But outside those walls, not everyone was so ready to stand beside him, especially those who had been betting on the billion-dollar payout. 2 days later, Elijah's phone buzzed. It was a message from Theron Ingram, his cousin and co-founder, the man who had been with him in the trenches from day one. One line. "We need to talk, face to face." They met at a Greasy Spoon diner in Hammond, Indiana, the same booth where they'd once sketched out their first business plan on a stack of napkins. Theron was already there, nursing a cup of coffee, when Elijah slid in across from him. "I heard from Monroe Bank this morning," Theron said, not wasting any time. "They're pausing our line of credit, the one we were going to use to scale the entire West Coast operation." Elijah nodded slowly. "I figured something like that might happen." Theron stared at him, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You figured? Eli, we were right there. This wasn't some random buyout. This was it. Our generational leap. Our kids' future. Our kids' kids' future. And I wasn't going to let that future be built on my mother's humiliation," Elijah replied, his voice quiet but firm. Theron shook his head, his face hard. "Did you ever think that maybe, just maybe, that was her fight to pick? Not yours?" Elijah leaned in, his voice dropping. "She wasn't fighting, Theron. She was being stepped on. There's a difference." Theron sighed, a sound heavy with frustration. "This isn't the same as the old neighborhood, man. You can't just throw a punch. You made a decision that affects all of us, without asking any of us. And now people are saying you did it for clout, for the headlines." "I did it because I was raised not to sell my name for a seat at someone else's table." Theron sat back, his lips pressed into a thin, tight line. "You're lucky the world sees you as a hero right now. You'd better hope that feeling lasts." Elijah stood, tossing a $20 bill on the table. "If it doesn't, I'll still be able to sleep at night." But deep down, even Elijah knew the real storm hadn't even hit yet. Not until the Sterlings made their next move. The Sterling estate in Aspen was built like a medieval fortress, imposing stone walls, antique iron gates, and hedges trimmed with military precision. Inside the main study, a room paneled with dark mahogany, the family gathered. The air was thick with unspoken resentments. No one dared to touch the wine that had been poured. Beatrice Sterling sat at the head of the long table, her fingers steepled under her chin, her expression unreadable. Harrison, her eldest, was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Bradley was scrolling mindlessly through his phone, visibly nervous. The only one who seemed at ease was Elellanar Wynne, their crisis PR manager, a woman who specialized in cleaning up messes for the ultra-rich. "We need to issue a statement," she said, her voice crisp. "Something short, acknowledging the incident, expressing regret, and emphasizing your family's shared values." Beatrice scoffed. "What values? The woman looked like she didn't belong. That is not my fault." Elellanar Wynne blinked once, slowly. "You just said that out loud, in front of your children, while I am sitting here trying to protect your legacy from imploding." Harrison stopped pacing. "Mom, Elijah Vance walking away from this deal has already tanked interest in our entire tech sector portfolio. Do you understand how bad this is for us?" "He'll come back," she said confidently, waving a dismissive hand. "They always do. Pride fades when the money runs out." Elellanar Wynne shut her leather-bound binder with a sharp snap. "You don't get it, Beatrice. This isn't about the deal anymore. This is cultural. He struck a nerve." Bradley finally looked up from his phone. "People are calling him a hero, Mom. They're reposting his press conference, quoting him like he's Martin Luther King Jr. It's everywhere." "They'll forget by next week," Beatrice insisted. Harrison looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time, not as a powerful matriarch, but as a cracked and fading portrait of a bygone era. No, they won't. You have become the face of elitist, out-of-touch racism in every podcast and headline in the country right now, and you haven't even said you're sorry. I am not apologizing for having standards. Oh? Then we're done, Harrison said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. You've already cost us one deal. I'm not going to let you cost us the entire family business. He turned to face her directly. Effective immediately, you will be taking a leave of absence from the board. You will have no public-facing role with this company. She turned slowly, her eyes wide with shock. You're going to side with them? No, he said, his voice firm, unwavering. I'm siding with reality. The room was silent again. Beatrice Sterling's empire, built on a foundation of carefully curated polish and absolute control, was wobbling on its foundation. Because all the press releases in the world couldn't erase that moment on the terrace. Her voice, that dismissive tone, and the look on Eleanor Vance's face. Eventually, the Sterling Corporation did release a statement. It was bland, cold, and dripping with corporate legalese. The Sterling Corporation regrets the recent miscommunication that led to the premature termination of merger discussions. It mentioned upholding values of inclusion and mutual respect without a hint of sincerity. Elijah didn't respond publicly. His silence was more powerful than any press release could ever be. Instead, he just kept building. By now, journalists had dug deep into his background. They found photos of a young Elijah delivering packages in Gary. They unearthed a quote from a former high school teacher who remembered him staying after class to study business textbooks. A clip from an old podcast resurfaced, with Elijah saying, "I'm not trying to get into anyone's club. I'm trying to build my own house." Meanwhile, Eleanor Vance had become a quiet icon in her own right. She agreed to one brief interview on a morning show. Sitting in a simple armchair, her hands folded in her lap, she projected an aura of unshakable grace. "I didn't ask for any of this attention," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But I raised my son to speak up when silence costs too much." The host asked if, in hindsight, she would have preferred he just sign the deal and avoid the fuss. She smiled, a gentle but firm expression. "Some money comes with chains attached, and I'm too old to start wearing chains now." The clip went viral. Influencers stitched it. Young entrepreneurs quoted it on panels. And quietly, one by one, companies started pulling out of partnerships with Sterling-owned entities. Not because of Elijah, but because of what Beatrice had come to represent. In an era where a reputation built over a century can be destroyed by a 10-second video clip, perception had become reality, and the reality was shifting under the Sterling's feet. Still, Elijah didn't gloat. He went to work. He met with new partners, hired more staff, and visited his mother every Sunday, bringing her gardenias from the florist and banana pudding from the same small bakery in Gary she'd loved for 40 years. But just when things seemed to be stabilizing, an unexpected phone call would pull Elijah right back into the spotlight. This time, it wasn't for what he'd walked away from, but for what someone else had dug up. The call came just after 8 p.m. on a Wednesday. Elijah was alone in his office, the Chicago skyline glittering outside his window as he worked through quarterly projections. The building was mostly dark, the hum of the cleaning crew's vacuums a distant white noise. He almost didn't answer the blocked number, but some instinct told him to pick up. "Mr. Vance?" The voice was sharp, a little raspy, like it belonged to someone who'd smoked for decades and only just quit. "I'm not calling to make trouble. I'm calling because you need to know what they're trying to do to you." Elijah sat up straight. "Who is this?" "I worked with the Sterlings for 15 years. I was on their legal acquisition team. You're not the first name they've tried to erase when it didn't suit them." Erase? They're preparing a countersuit, the voice continued, urgent and low. But it's a smear campaign. They're digging into your early business filings, your first funding rounds, trying to frame you as unstable, volatile. They want to make you look like a hothead who brought politics into business and destroyed shareholder value. They're hoping people will forget why you walked away in the first place. Elijah leaned back, staring out at the city lights. And why are you telling me this? Because I've seen them do it before. They destroy, then they deny. You made the unforgivable mistake of embarrassing them in public. They will try to bury you quietly. The line clicked dead. Elijah sat there, unmoving. He knew the Sterlings played hardball, but this was different. This was war, and he knew it wouldn't stop with his name. They'd aim at his reputation, his team, even his mother if they felt they had to. He called Naya Whitlow first thing the next morning. "They're coming after you," she said, completely unsurprised after he relayed the conversation. "Beatrice doesn't lose quietly. She's going to try and weaponize your own story, flip the narrative, and make it seem like you were the aggressor all along." "Let her try," Elijah replied, a cold fire in his voice. But Nia was already thinking 5 steps ahead. "We need to show people who you are before she gets the chance to tell them who you're not." She got to work. Within 48 hours, a new media campaign was launched. No slogans, no flashy ads, no drama, just real stories. Warehouse workers from the graveyard shift recorded testimonials on their phones about how Elijah knew their names and had helped them with family emergencies. Investors talked about his radical transparency during tough financial quarters. Former interns posted videos about how he had mentored them personally, without any cameras or hashtags around. But the most powerful video came from Elellanar. Seated in her small, immaculate living room, she looked straight into the camera and said, "I didn't raise my son to be a businessman. I raised him to be a man. A man who stands up, especially when standing up means you might lose something." It landed like a thunderclap. The cable news shows couldn't ignore it. The hashtags trended again. And suddenly, the Sterling strategy of subtle discrediting and veiled accusations started to look exactly like what it was. The bitter, desperate flailing of a fallen dynasty. Still, they didn't stop. A week later, the Sterling Group's lawyers released documents suggesting Elijah had violated early partnership clauses during a 2018 deal with a company called Stratus Line Logistics. The implication was that he had a history of cutting ties abruptly and unprofessionally. But Stratus's CEO, a man named Leonard Greer, went on the record that same day. "Elijah Vance walked away from our deal," he said in a statement to the press, "because he refused to approve my board's proposal to cut wages for our truck drivers. Looking back, I wish I'd done the same thing." It backfired again. The narrative was slipping out of the Sterling family's grasp like sand through their fingers. And every attempt to regain control only magnified the original wound, the one they still refused to properly acknowledge or apologize for. Inside the Sterling home, Beatrice was beginning to feel the walls close in. Contracts were evaporating. Long-standing event invitations were being rescinded. A museum board quietly removed her from her honorary seat. But Beatrice didn't blame herself. Not once. "It's a fad," she snapped at Harrison over a silent breakfast. "Social media outrage. It'll fade." Harrison wasn't so sure anymore. "It's not fading, Mother. It's building. Because you never once, not for a single second, admitted you were wrong." She sipped her coffee, as if the conversation bored her. "And I won't." He stood then, his breakfast untouched. "The family business can no longer afford your principles." She didn't respond, but for the first time, her hands, resting on the table, trembled just slightly. While the Sterlings were losing ground, Elijah was about to face a moment of truth that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with legacy. He stood in his mother's backyard in Gary, watching her clip basil from the small planter box they had built together 2 summers ago. The sun was low, casting a soft orange glow on the grass. Gloria wore one of her older church dresses, faded at the seams but still neatly pressed. She didn't say much, just moved with a slow, methodical grace, as if the weight of the last few weeks hadn't touched her. But Elijah knew better. "Ma," he said, not looking at her directly, "are you all right with all of this? The attention, the stories?" She didn't look up from her basil. "Attention doesn't bother me, son, but I know what comes with it." "What do you mean?" Eleanor snipped another leaf, placing it gently into the bowl, resting on her hip. "They don't like it when one of us walks out of their room with our heads held high. It makes them feel small, so they try to make you feel smaller." He sat down on the old wooden porch steps. "They're still trying, still spinning it like I blew up the deal over nothing." She finally looked at him, her eyes clear and wise. "You and I both know it wasn't nothing, and anyone who says it was doesn't understand the cost of respect." He nodded, silent for a long moment. "Theron's still upset," he said quietly. "He feels like I took something away from the family." Eleanor walked over, lowering herself onto the steps beside him with a soft groan. "Baby, every family's got its storms. But if you bend in the middle of it, what do you have left to hand down to the ones who come after you?" "I just wanted to protect you," he said, his voice softening. "And you did," she replied, placing a hand on his knee. "But it wasn't just about me, was it? It was about what you represent now. Don't you run from that." That night, back in his high-rise apartment in Chicago, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Leonard Greer, the Stratus CEO. "A congressional council in D.C. wants to speak with you. They're building a special panel on ethical business practices and corporate responsibility. They want you to lead it." Elijah stared at the screen. He never asked for any of this. He just wanted to build something honest, something that would last. But now his story was turning into something bigger, something louder. And with that kind of platform came a pressure he had never anticipated. Could he live up to the symbol he had become? Before he could answer that question, a final letter would arrive, one that had nothing to do with the Sterlings, but would shake him just as deeply. The envelope was thin, off-white, with no return address. Just his name, Elijah Vance, typed cleanly across the center. It arrived through regular mail, mixed in with a stack of invoices and vendor proposals. He didn't even open it until hours later, when the office had cleared out, and the only sound was the hum of the city below. The letter inside was handwritten in neat, careful cursive. "Mr. Vance, you don't know me, but I feel like I know who you are. My father was the head groundskeeper at the Sterling estate in Aspen from 1985 until he passed away in 2009. He raised me and my 2 sisters on that job. He woke up before the sun, he never complained, and he taught us to be proud, even when we were invisible to the people we worked for. I saw your story on the news and I cried, not because I was surprised by what happened to your mother, because I wasn't, but because for once, someone said no and they meant it. You reminded me of my father. He never had your platform or your money, but he had your spine. I just wanted you to know. Not everyone forgets where they came from or who they're standing up for." With deep respect, Camille Pierce Elijah read it twice, then a third time. He folded it slowly and set it on his desk. That name, Camille Pierce, stirred something deep within him. He told his mother about it over the phone that night. "She said I reminded her of her father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Funny how truth reaches you, isn't it?" Gloria said softly. "It doesn't matter the route. It always finds its way home." The letter had landed like an anchor in his chest, not heavy with regret, but with meaning, with purpose. He carried so much responsibility now. It felt good to know that his choice had reached someone who had lived in the shadow of that same gate for decades. He asked Naya to find Camille, quietly. 2 days later, Naya called back. Found her. She teaches 4th grade in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Doesn't do social media. Lives in a small apartment with a rescue dog. She said she didn't expect you to ever see the letter, let alone write back. I want to visit her, Elijah said. Should I call ahead? No, he replied. I'll just knock. 2 days later, he stood on a small stoop in Harrisburg, holding a paper bag from a local bakery and feeling something he rarely felt anymore. Nervous. Camille opened the door on the second knock. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with a kind face and a brown ponytail, wearing jeans and a school district sweatshirt. When she saw him, she froze. I'm Elijah, he said with a small smile. And this is banana bread. I figured you might be tired of people only wanting something from you. Camille blinked, then let out a breathy, surprised laugh. Come on in before my dog tries to eat the bag. Inside, the apartment was warm and lived in, a framed photo of an older man in work boots, a quiet dignity in his eyes, sat on the mantel. Your father? Elijah asked. She nodded. They sat and talked for 2 hours. She told him stories about her dad, about how he refused to call the Sterlings sir and ma'am, about how he saved every check to put his daughters through college, how he taught her to read using the contracts and invoices he brought home. He would have liked you, she said. Not because you made it big, but because you knew when it was time to walk away. When Elijah left, she handed him a copy of an old photograph. It was her dad, standing under a tall oak tree on the Sterling estate, a rake in his hand and a quiet pride on his face. For when the world gets loud again, she said. He thanked her, tucked the photo into his jacket pocket, and walked back to his car. Sometimes, the most powerful reminders don't come from headlines or boardrooms. They come from handwritten letters, old oak trees, and the quiet legacies of good men. But just as he was starting to feel like he'd found his footing, the world would test him one last time, in a way that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with loss. It started with a voicemail from a nurse, a gentle request to call back. Nothing urgent, she said. His mother, Elellanar, had fainted briefly during her weekly Bible study. They'd brought her to Capital Care Medical Center in Gary, just to be safe. Elijah didn't wait. He left a meeting mid-sentence, grabbed his keys, and drove the Skyway with his jaw locked tight. When he arrived, Elellanar was sitting up in the hospital bed, looking mildly annoyed and sipping a ginger ale. I told them I just stood up too fast, she said as he walked in. Didn't need all this fuss. But Elijah could see the fatigue in her eyes, the way her hand trembled slightly as she set the cup down. The doctor, a sharp, kind woman named May Lynn, pulled him aside. Your mother's vitals are stable, but we'd like to run a few more tests. Her blood pressure is fluctuating more than we'd like. A full cardiac workup is in order. Elijah nodded. Run every test you need to. The results came in over the next 2 days. Nothing dire, no ticking time bomb. But there were small flags. A leaky valve, a mild arrhythmia, iron deficiency. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but together they painted a clear picture. Life doesn't wait forever. That night, as they sat together watching reruns of Sanford and Son in her hospital room, Elellanar spoke without looking away from the screen. You've done good, baby. He chuckled. Did you just call me baby in front of the nurse? I brought you into this world. I get to call you baby until I leave it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm not done yet, Ma. I know, she said, but don't wait too long to live. That landed differently. He really looked at her then, the deep lines carved by decades of time and sacrifice, the woman who never asked for a stage but had somehow become the moral heart of a national story. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what you told me, about legacy, about not handing down silence." She turned her head to look at him. "I want to start something," he continued, "a foundation for the workers, the drivers, the warehouse crews, the people who actually make this country run. Real support, health screenings, childcare stipends, tuition assistance for their kids, not just write-ups and empty workshops, real action." Eleanor's mouth curved slowly into a proud, beautiful smile. "That sounds like you. I want to name it after you." Now her eyes welled up, even as she tried to hide it with a cough. "You don't need to do that." "I do," Elijah said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Because you built me." A few weeks later, the Elellanar Vance Initiative was announced. It wasn't flashy. There was no red carpet gala, no glitzy press tour, just a simple website, a launch video featuring some of their own employees, and partnerships with 3 established nonprofits to start. It caught fire. Local news picked it up, then national outlets. And in a matter of weeks, the conversation shifted again, from confrontation to construction, from calling out broken rooms to building better ones. At the initiative's first Community Day event, held in a park in Gary, Elijah stood at a long folding table, handing out plates of barbecue. Food trucks lined the lot, kids ran between face painters and book drives, and workers who'd once feared for their jobs now stood with their families, laughing and talking about the future. He took the mic for just a moment. "People said I was crazy to turn down $1 billion, he told the crowd. "But this right here, this is worth more than any check anyone could ever write." The crowd applauded, not a thunderous ovation, but something warmer, more real. As the sun set and the lot slowly emptied, Elijah looked up at the sky and thought of Camille's father, of his cousin Theron, of the sterile Sterling boardroom, and of the look on his mother's face when he walked her out of that country club. Everything that followed that storm had led him here. And as he stood there, watching the last of the families head home, he finally understood. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind in a will. It's about what you live through, what you stand for, and what you refuse under any circumstances to let die in silence. Eli's story is a powerful reminder that our real value isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. If this story moved you, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you're subscribed for more stories that really matter. Thank you for watching.